Good morning, everybody. This is Grandma's canister back in California. I miss Grandma. My aunt has the rest of the canisters. I need to get it back to her, but I'm in no hurry. It's so pretty. So maybe we can finish up Acts today. The nation is finishing, hopefully peaking, people getting better and slowly opening up. God be with us. Acts 25:13. A few days later, there's a few days. So Paul has been arrested and is being moved around. King Agrippa and Bernice, I'm going to say Bernice, it might be Bernice, but I'll say Bernice, arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. So a few days later, the king and queen, I believe this is his sister, went to go pay their respects and say hi to Festus. That's a formal way to say hello and greetings. Pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. Hey, let's talk about Paul. Tomorrow you will hear him, he replied. So Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. And Festus said, tomorrow you will hear him. So this is King James and Queen Elizabeth or somebody, I'm not sure. But very formal people. Pomp and circumstance. It's formality. Acts 25:23. The next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and ceremony and entered the audience room with the high-ranking military officials and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. So great pomp and ceremony. I have them holding hands, but I think it's his sister. Audience room, high-ranking military officials, and prominent men of the city. So everybody got into the audience room. I don't know, I guess it was separate than the trial. So King Agrippa, Bernice, high-ranking military officials, prominent men of the city, important men of the city, and at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Bring in Paul. Acts 26:1. Then Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. So Paul motioned with his hand and made his defense. So Agrippa said, you have permission, you are able to speak for yourself. And so Paul gives his speech defending himself. King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews, especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. So I consider myself lucky or fortunate, blessed, to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews, especially so because you are well acquainted, you know all the Jewish customs and controversies, arguments. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. The Messiah, here's Paul speaking, the Messiah would suffer, and as the first to rise from the dead, would bring the message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles. Okay, I don't have any drawings here, but I should have light to his people and the Gentiles. He was the first to rise from the dead. What about Lazarus, though? So that's a speech, and King Agrippa says, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. And Paul says, I would to God that not only you, but all who hear me today. So the king says, you almost persuade me. And Paul says, not only you, but all who hear me today. So we all want to persuade our non-Christian friends. Please become Christian, especially at this time. Anytime. And anybody. Then Agrippa said to Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? So Agrippa said, what? Maybe, I'm not sure if he's Jewish or not. He knows the Jewish customs. Do you think you can persuade me? Maybe he's into his own religion, but hopefully he can leave it. In such a short time, can you persuade me to be a Christian? Paul replied, short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains. So short time or long time, instantly or hours or days, I pray, now is the time. I pray that you and everyone listening, there's their ears and they're listening. I pray that you and everyone listening will be like me, be like Paul, become like me, except for these chains. So we want to be like Paul, believe like him, except for his chains. So hopefully they're listening. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense. You're out of your mind. You're crazy, Paul. Your great learning is driving you insane. Crazy. I am not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is reasonable and true, Paul replied. So maybe some people tell us, oh, you're crazy. No way. But it's true. It's reasonable and true, Paul replied. He's probably a good debater, good arguer, good pastor, preacher. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice, because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? I know you do. So the king is familiar with these things, says Paul. I can speak freely to him. I'm convinced that none of this has escaped his notice. So maybe Festus is protecting King Agrippa, and Paul says, no, I can speak like this. He knows. I haven't done this in the corner. None of this has escaped his notice. So Agrippa is watching and looking. King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? I know you do. Do you? Yes, you do. Do you believe in the prophets, the leaders in the past who told the future? Acts 26:30. So the king rose. I wonder if it was suddenly. The king rose, and the governor, and Bernice, and those sitting with him. They all got up and exited, stage left. The king rose, and with him the governor, and Bernice, and those sitting with them. After they left the room, they began saying to one another, This man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment. So everybody got up, left the room, and said, Paul does not deserve death nor imprisonment. And that is the king, Bernice, governor, and those sitting with them. Agrippa said to Festus, This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. Paul could have been free, except he called for Caesar. So to Caesar he's going to go, I think. When Acts 27:1, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, we're going to go to Italy. Paul and some prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius who belonged to the imperial regiment. So it was decided they're going to go to Italy. There's the boot of Italy. Paul and some prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius. So I guess Luke is in here. I don't know if Luke is in prison too. The centurion is of the imperial kingly regiment. So that's good, I guess, that they're an important troop or army group. We boarded a ship from We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. So we boarded a ship from Adramyttium and about to sail for ports along the coast of Asia. Going from port to port in Asia. I guess Ephesus. I still gotta look that up. So they went from port to port and put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. In kindness, Julius said, "You can go to Paul." And his friends provided for his needs. So they landed at Sidon, I'm not sure. And his friends provided for his needs, gave him what he needed. And Julius, in kindness, said, "You can go to Paul." So that was nice. From there, we passed the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. I'm not sure what a lee is, but that's the lee of Cyprus, and the winds were against them. So I guess they pushed them where they didn't want to go, just like that happens to us sometimes. We're pushed where we don't want to go. When we had sailed across the open sea, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we came to a place called Fair Place. So the winds brought us to the open sea, or they sailed across the open sea, and the winds were against them, landed at Myra in Lycia, and there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway. We went slowly for many days. There's Crete, and then they came to a place called Fair Haven. A lot of traveling. Acts 27:9. Much time had been lost, and sailing had become dangerous by now, because it was after the Day of Atonement. So I guess after that day, Jewish festival day, atonement is asking forgiveness from God. Day of Atonement, the weather gets worse, I guess. They lost time. There's the hourglass. They lost time. And after the Day of Atonement, I should write that down, it was dangerous sailing. Uh-oh, I hope everybody's okay. So Paul warned them, told them something bad was going to happen. "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also." So Paul, need to have a little line here. Paul warned them, we're going to have loss to the ship and to cargo and to our own lives. Our voyage, our trip is going to be disastrous, crazy, and bad things are going to happen. But the centurion, the soldier, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Centurion did not listen to what Paul said. There's his ears listening. He didn't listen to Paul. He followed the advice of the pilot and owner of the ship. So the pilot and the owner, the driver, here's the steering wheel, and the owner of the ship said to go a different way. And there's Paul saying, "Men, I believe this voyage will end in disaster and loss of cargo, the ship, and our lives." No, it's not true. No, it's not true. Believe us. And that's the helmsman, the captain, the pilot, and the owner said. So they're not listening to Paul, the religious leader, but the captain, the leader of the ship. "We were hardly able to keep the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it, brought it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. They lowered the ship anchor and let the ship be driven along." So they were hardly able to keep the lifeboat, the extra boat, the safety boat, secure. So here's the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats, so the lifeboat, they hoisted it aboard. They brought it, lifted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself. Here are the ropes, and they put it under the ship, and they lowered the anchor and let the ship be driven along. Okay, so the weather's getting worse. "We were hardly able to keep the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. They lowered the ship's anchor and let the ship be driven along." Where's it going to go? "We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo supplies overboard." So we took such a violent battering from the storm. Kind of like an onomatopoeia, bat. Battering from the storm. They threw the cargo and supplies over so they wouldn't sink, I guess, and the tackle. So the tackle, I think, is fishing supplies. "We threw the cargo overboard and the tackle." So there's the boat in its full entirety, the full picture. "On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved." So on the third day, they threw the tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun, no stars, appeared for many days, and the storm continued. Hey, that's what's happening with us. The storm continues. We finally gave up all hope of being saved. No hope of being saved. We got to keep up the hope, right, guys? And left the harbor. Third day, threw ships and tackle overboard. And cables. So, wait, I don't know what those cables are. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, spend the winter, the majority decided that we should sail on. So here's the majority. Come on, let's sail on. The harbor, they were going to go into the harbor, the place where the boats stay. But it wasn't a good place to winter, to spend the winter. It was unsuitable. So since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided to sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both south, west, and northwest. So I'm not sure if I drew this right, but they were hoping to reach Phoenix for the winter. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both south, west, and northwest. And there's the winter. So hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both south, west, and northwest. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. So a gentle wind, south wind, began to blow. They saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. And here's from the previous page, no sun, no stars for many days. That's us in Virginia. A lot of sun, a lot of clouds for a few days. We'll be okay. Gotta keep going. A tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. So a big wind comes called Euroclydon. Acts 27:14. Before long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave into it and were driven along, running along the sea of a small island called Clauda. So I'm not sure what a lee is, but we running along the lee of a small island called Clauda. So before long, a wind of hurricane force, northeaster of hurricane force, swept down from the island. The ship was caught and could not head into the wind. So we gave into it and were driven along, running along the lee of a small island called Clauda. Don't you feel sometimes you're just caught in the water and the current and driven along? Acts 27:21. I think they're about to be shipwrecked. This is a long trial. Acts 27:21. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourself this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong to and to whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen, just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.'" So I like those people who are encouraging. So Paul is telling the sailors to eat, and I guess they're taking heart. Do not be afraid. Take heart. So Paul, after they had gone a long time with food, Paul stood up and said, "You should have taken my advice not to sail. You would have spared yourself this damage and loss. But I keep your courage, take heart, be strong, be bold, because none of